turn you over to Eric Merz.
Well, hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, Eric.
Oh,
You might ask, well, how did Eric get into this position of sharing this information today? Well, it was probably one of those little conversations that I had with Wendy or Gerard, and I think I was putting together this workshop, and then they said, "Hey, would you be able to present that to our group, on one of these calls?" And I said, "Sure." And so here I am. And what I'm going to show you today is really just kind of walk through what we did with the workshop, and we used some of the materials that we have through Trusted Advisors, and we kind of put some other things together. So I'm just going to kind of walk through it, and if you have any questions, feel free to chime in and ask those as we go. I'm happy to share this with you, after this call, put this available. It's PowerPoint. It's not anything rocket science, but let me just put the slideshow on. Can everybody see it all right?
Yep.
Okay, so basically my partner, Lauren Patterson, and I developed this workshop. We have been doing a workshop series, and we have a different subject each time we have one of these workshops, and we decided to do one on company culture. And it was about the same time, I think, that Trusted Advisors had released their chapter on culture. And so it had helped us a lot by having that coming out at the same time. Because a lot of people are talking about culture, but then how do you actually change the culture? How do you develop the culture that you want? And this was the overview here. We look at the company culture, how is it defined, the values, leadership, recruiting and training, setting and meeting expectations, team development, franchise mentality, survey. These are the headings that we used in our workshop. And I believe that you could probably use many different ones than these. But I think some of these probably most discussions on culture are going to get into values. They're going to get into leadership, because that's really where it starts in terms of setting that culture. And we had a definition that we just kind of pulled off of, I think, probably did some research online and pulled this definition together. It defines the proper way to behave within the organization. This culture consists of shared beliefs and values established by leaders and then communicated and reinforced through various methods. So we had a group of, I think, about 10 or 12 business owners in the room, if you will. So that kind of set the setting here. And we're talking about culture, and they're all different industries. So, it's really a marketing endeavor for us. We like to bring value to the community, but of course we're looking for clients, and talking about culture, you're going to uncover a lot of problems, if you will, in an organization or in a company or in an industry. So it's really, culture has become a big subject and something to be studied. I think entrepreneurs are interested in it, even if they haven't really done it in the past. It keeps coming up, and whether they like it or not, they have a culture, so they can say, well, I don't need to deal with all this stuff. Well, that's fine. Then that's your culture. Don't deal with it. So I mean, you could, I kind of made light of that when I was going through this presentation with the business owners. And we talked about values. What are they? And we kind of did a little exercise on, what their personal core values are. We had a workbook that went with this, and I'll show you that too when we get through this show here. What are the difference between your personal core values and your organization's core values? Those should be somewhat aligned or not in total conflict, but they might be different in terms of how you speak about yourself versus the organization. And I wasn't just talking about the business owners or the leaders of the organization themselves, but how each individual in the organization should look at their own personal core values and how well does that align with the organization? Because if there's a lot of misalignment, then maybe that's where you're having to struggle with developing the culture. So we spent quite a bit of time on values and had them write out their own personal values, as well as if they had the organizational core values. We got some examples up on the board. So I like to put up flip charts and write on those things and then poster them all over the place when we're doing these workshops. So this PowerPoint's just kind of the starting place. Then we talked about leadership and culture. There's, they're two sides of the same coin. Your leaders are going to set the tone for the culture, and how they communicate that is just as critical as what they do. If they're communicating it at all, a lot of times you go in an organization, you'll find out that one side of the building doesn't even resemble the other side. I don't know if you guys have ever found that, but I have. And, there needs to be a certain amount of vulnerability by leadership to open up to these discussions. And then what kind of an example are the leaders showing? Or, they might be talking one game and leading another game. So that's really important to look at, are our actions and behaviors, are they in line with our values and what we say we are and who we are? And what is the ethic? It varies from place to place. That's part of the culture too, but the ethic of the leadership and the work ethic of the leadership sets the tone. Now, some people will argue that, do as I say, don't do as I do, but that really doesn't usually work for most people. Unless you have strong compliance measures in place, it might work. But I think more and more as the culture of the society changes, that's going to be less acceptable. Maybe in the past it worked. Anybody have any questions at this point? I'm just kind of rolling.
No, you're doing great.
Okay. So then we talked about recruiting and training and how important that was to keeping the culture, or let's say you're trying to create a culture. You've got some players in there that align with it. You've got some maybe that don't. So you want to make sure that you're adding people that are going to add to the culture that you're trying to create. You need to know their needs, what your needs are, what their needs are, and their personality types. And I'm not just talking about, what we use in terms of our coaching, but the types of people and personalities that are going to work together, not just their behavior styles, but what do they like, and some industries, I think this is easier to do than others personally. I mean, I think that, say you have a design firm that designs buildings or designs even websites or whatever, you got a lot of creative type people. Well, that's kind of going to be your culture of that, but you're going to have some support people there that are maybe more administratively structured than creative people to keep everything together. But they have to like the idea that they're developing and designing new things. That's what the company does or the organization does. So they can add to the team by bringing in their organizational skills or administrative skills. And then, talked about preparing for the arrival. So if you really want them to get the culture, then you need to make sure you're going to train it from the beginning. And you must know what their roles and expectations and objectives, before you even begin looking for them, so that you can bring the right people in, and then it's easy to onboard them. Excuse me. So then you get into scouting. Where are you going to find these people? Probably you're going to look for people maybe in a similar culture, or you're going to find people this could be a marketing thing for your ads for looking for people, is to look at people that maybe aren't satisfied where they're at because they don't match the culture. So you could put that culture right up front. Say, hey, not fitting in where you're at, due to XYZ, come check us out. And that could be a way to interrupt and get the right people that meet your culture. Then asking the right questions, of course, and loading them up with questions about that would get you to the answer as to whether or not they might be a good fit in your culture or might be an addition to what you're trying to build. Of course, onboarding is important after you hire the person to have that training process. And then, reviews, build into your culture a way to review, to see, if these are our core values, this is what we're trying to build. Are we holding people accountable to those core values in their behaviors, their actions, their performance, as opposed to just, measuring them in the standard way. We brought into the aspect of bringing in the core values right into the evaluation process. And if someone's not meeting those core values, then, that's where you start. And it makes the discussion really a lot easier, actually. They might self-opt out of the organization because they know they're not a good fit. Because when you start asking those kinds of questions and it doesn't fit, it becomes uncomfortable. And it's a lot less expensive if they opt out on their own than it is usually to go the other route. So I always look at that as a positive. Everything you do is almost like a two-edged sword. You either attract or you repel. And it's okay, because that way people get on their way and they go find their way. And isn't that what we want people to do? And then people are attracted that come in and they add value to the organization, and the organization adds value to their clients and customers. So, any questions on all of this? This is a big section.
Where do you find on the onboarding specifically? What's your experience with clients that actually take the time to have a fairly robust onboarding system?
Most don't. I say 80, 90% don't. And even those that do probably will, if you start analyzing it, they probably would tell you that, yeah, we should have done a little bit more here and a little bit more there. So it has to be built into a process, I think, and it has to become a goal to start with, to change that culture of not onboarding properly, because that's what you have when you don't have it, right? I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't find it very often where they really do a good job.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Those business owners you assembled in that room, were they companies of all different sizes, and did they have HR departments that were involved in this, or were they learning?
No, these are mostly small businesses.
Okay.
So it gets really challenging at that level to have a robust program. But we wanted to bring up the concept of, even if let's say they're doing 10% of what they should do, then if we could get them to 50%, it could be a huge difference for those small companies if they could do it. So that's how I look at a lot of things, is like, it's gotta be relative to who they are. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Yeah, because I think larger companies generally are better at this and take more time doing this, and they have people to support it and get it done. And small businesses usually don't. Any other questions?
Hey, just a comment, Eric. This is Mike Myers. I came out
Yeah,
of
Mike.
Lockheed Martin 3 years ago, or almost 3 years ago. And, even though we had a pretty robust, you might call it, onboarding process, I'm not sure how effective it was. You know, it was mostly conducted by human resources and security. And of course, being in a defense business, we were very intensely focused on security.
Sure.
But we didn't have the continuity. It didn't continue. And so, you know, after you did onboarding, you go talk to your manager, and the manager more than likely had no idea what you learned in onboarding. And then you would get assigned to a buddy, but that never worked, right? There was no consequences to the buddy or to the person for not going through with that process. So
Yeah.
it kind of, there's almost like an oxymoron there. You do onboarding, you bring in a group of 10 to 20 people, and somebody that's mostly disconnected from them does the onboarding, and then you throw them into the work area, and it's not the same connections at all. So that's something to think about, even with a small company, that you can't staff this out, you can't outsource it. You know, really the boss needs to do the onboarding.
Well, yeah, that's my way of thinking. I agree with that. I mean, I think it has to be the people they're going to be working with or working under that have to oversee that. I think HR could support some of, you know, the administrative part of it, but I think it has to be. I think the leadership has to take ownership of this program and has to make sure that it's being effective.
Eric,
And then-
oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Sandy.
Hi, Sandy.
Just an additional comment, especially in the category of knowing your needs. I have had a couple of experiences where I worked where it was a new leader being brought on, a new CEO, who didn't fit the culture. So it wasn't the leader setting the expectations for others. They were already built. It was an existing company that had a very strong culture. And people didn't take enough account of that in the hiring of a new CEO. And at the end of the day, I mean, we had two that absolutely, blew out of there. I mean, and had to be fired because they just were really a bad fit. And it was really a culture issue. This was a nonprofit, so I mean, the board had certain responsibility, and you'll probably get into this the next time. They set the wrong expectations in part, so they were also part of the problem. But
Yeah.
But the culture, I mean, sometimes for something that has existed for a while, that has a fairly entrenched culture, I mean, that's a particular challenge for a new person coming in.
Is that a
Sure.
good entrenched culture, or is that necessarily a good culture that you're referring to, Sandy, that's strong and entrenched?
I mean, it was pretty good. I mean, I think, depending on perspectives. I mean, it was very participatory, just to take one example. Everybody felt they had ownership in how things move forward. And when you got a CEO coming in that was much more top down, you met tons of resistance.
Right.
One thing, and because it was based on engagement of people, including non-staff, the very hierarchical thing just didn't fly.
So really that goes back to preparing for the arrival, the wrong person arriving, unless you wanted to change that culture to something totally different, then maybe that would be the right person, but they probably wouldn't even last past the change.
Yeah. I mean, I think it started a bit when defining the needs for the person coming into the job. Not enough awareness of what was the culture, and then whether that was good or bad, and did we want to, go with it or change it or anything else. But I think they were blind to it.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really good point, that if you're looking for the top leader to come into an organization from the outside, then I think the people that are in that selection process have to be very keen on what the culture is and what the culture that they want to maintain, or did they want it to change. Now let's find the person who's going to match that. Now we have to clearly communicate that to that person so that they understand their expectations when they come in, is they're not going to change the culture. Is this going to be a good fit for them? That you got to have that kind of conversation. But that's a good point, though. I mean, that's from a different. Yeah, obviously, most of this discussion that we had in this workshop was from the top down. None of these leaders were going away from their own organization. So, but Anyway,
question.
good discussion on that. I like that.
Quick question. Does anybody have in their possession or know of, without going out to do a quick Google search, are there any lists of culture descriptors that you have, that you happen to have in your friendly neighborhood computer file someplace? If you do, if you could send them along to me, it would be helpful. I'm going back on mute.
Yeah, I don't have anything but that you're describing, but somebody else does, then that'd be nice to share. Or that'd be a nice thing to compile.
If anybody has anything, send them to me. I can send them to everybody on the call if someone wants to throw something out there.
Okay. And then, of course, the last thing I have here on the page is building reviews into your culture, and that's always a hard one to get people to be good at, or to make it effective in terms of what makes sense for their organization. And then there's ongoing reviewing. Is that part of the culture too? Ongoing feedback. In fact, I was just started working on an article about feedback and evaluations, the formal process and versus the informal process, and how it should be linked together. And of course, they should be linked into, the culture, in terms of if you're trying to build a certain culture, you want to review that part of what their performance is, not just, they developed 100 widgets last month and that's all they were expected to do. Great job. But meanwhile, they sabotaged all their neighbors, so maybe that's not part of our culture. All right. So setting and meeting expectations, get a plan and focus on what needs to be done and not how. Write it down so that you have something to refer back and it's clear. Communicate it to your team regularly. This kind of goes with this whole idea of putting things down so everybody understands what's expected of them. Meeting with your team, make sure you meet together to identify each person's part of the team, how they work together. Schedule time to review. If your team is not performing, ask yourself, are you communicating effectively? So all this has to do with, if you want to really create the culture, then you're going to have to invest time as a leader and as a team. Talking about team development, because this was to us, team development is clearly one of the most important parts of building a culture. It's having a team that's working together. No matter what kind of a culture you're trying to develop, they got to be able to work together in that culture. Now we just talked about, how the team develops, some basic stuff here, clarifying roles, creating a positive environment, open environment, relationships. You got to build relationships. You got to set ground rules, divide the work up, encourage everybody to collaborate together. Then we talked about franchise mentality. And then where this comes into play is really, if you talk about sustainability, and this is where I go, when you talk about sustainability, it can mean a lot of different things, but it's about building something that can be repeated or continue on. And we were talking to these small business owners, and we were talking about build your business as if you wanted to franchise it. So you could walk away at any moment out of your business and it would still run and operate. That's one way to build culture, isn't it? I mean, when you think about it, it's a culture of having a system and all the systems in place to run the business. It's having the understanding that when we bring people on board, how we do it, how we train them, how we maintain them, and how we take care of our customers, how we do the business process for that matter. That makes the business more scalable. We talked about different examples of franchises. So that was that discussion. And that's an opinion, is, this franchise mentality, that's just, I was an example to these business owners, how they could build their culture. And we talked about different franchises and how they have their own culture as a franchise, and they try to parlay that down to all their franchisees. Right. So that's what we're kind of talked about there. So we asked them to take a survey, and this is one of the surveys I think came from Trusted Advisors. I don't know if it was at the session, the summit 2 times ago or something. There was a cultural survey in one of the breakout sessions. I think I got the Word document, and I've got it here. We can share it, but set goals to achieve the great culture. After that, set metrics in place to check the process and revisit the goals and measurements periodically. So this was into more like, okay, now we've talked about culture. Now, what do you want to do in your business? How are you, where is your current state of how your culture is? And then what goals do you want to set in terms of changing the culture, if you do, or maintaining it or taking it to another level in the way it is already. So we just kind of talked about this process. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. And then let me just refer to these. We had a workbook that went with this too, and I'm glad to share that with you guys if you'd like. This was the survey. Does this look familiar to you guys? Because I'm pretty sure I got it from Trusted Advisors.
Yeah, it's from us.
Yeah. So everybody should have that.
Can I make one comment on that?
Well, absolutely.
It's been around since 1985, at least since 1985. But there's the easiest way to score this thing may or may not be reflected in the current directions for it. I found it over the course of time, the best thing you can do is keep one of these as a master for yourself. And as other people's responses are coming in, just kind of do the old stick and bundling kind of thing, as opposed to treating it as a mathematical equation.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, what amount of confidence is shown in employees, and somebody says none, just put a little tick mark.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4 slash across it to create, bundles of 5.
Mm-hmm.
The last time I read the instructions for this, which I will admit was a while ago, it was talking about adding them up and creating an average. And why I do not think that's helpful is if you have half the group saying total and half the group saying none, the average will be someplace called around 2.5. But what you really need to see is the fact that you got barbells where you have 2 very different pieces of opinion about where those answers are lying. That'll be much more telling than kind of where the sanitized average is.
Well, and I think, as I'm looking at this too, I'm thinking, another addition to this would be if you marked anything other than, a positive answer, like 4 on that particular question, what would have made it move towards that? Or, what would change your score? What would need to happen to change the score? Or some kind of, I always like it when people rate something poorly, but then don't suggest any way to improve it. No, not really. I don't really like that. It was a joke. But maybe we could extend this, by asking that question. If not a 4, what would be necessary? Well, you'd have to fire the CEO, or what would happen? But you could get more feedback that way. But I like your suggestion of bundling up the answers and looking to see where people lie, because just because averages are bad in this case, because it doesn't really tell you anything.
I want to give you one other piece of friendly advice. If those of you on the call have this burning desire to turn this into bar graphs instead of the simple little method that I just talked about, please resist that temptation. Because when you go to present this back to the group, if that's the way you do it, having all of those bar charts, one following after another, after another, after another, will in fact put your participants to sleep at the speed of light. Where if you just have bundled answers on this sheet and you flash these 2 pages up on the screen, people immediately see what they need to see, and it's much, much cleaner, effective, and faster.
Yeah, because you'll probably just see, oh, there's quite a bit of activity in this box under this question. Oh, what's that all about? And then they can start a good discussion about that.
Bingo.
Got it. Very good, Doug. Thanks.
So this is Mike Myers. I want to go off of what Doug asked. He asked for like a list of cultures, culture descriptors. And I'm looking at this form, and this is not the first time I've looked at it. And I think to myself, okay, if I had a company and I scored all on the right-hand column, everybody scored there, how would I describe that company's culture? And I still don't have an answer, right? And similarly, if another company doing the same thing with the same kind of people in the same environment scored all on the left-hand column, how would I describe their culture? Other than, hey, they got a great culture, they got a terrible culture, but I don't know anything much more than that, right? So I'm looking for like a culture of punishment, a culture of retribution, a culture of honesty, a culture of accountability, a culture of, those kind of things. And then I don't know how to.
Well, I think this thing, that what this does is it gives you a start to those discussions for people to realize what kind of culture they do live in. I don't think it this necessarily defines or names what the culture is, but it gives you clues to that. And then I think people can start to talk about what they really like and what they don't like. And then what is that, how would they want to put that in one sentence or less? Right?
So I'm thinking about a company I'm working with, and everybody at the company says, man, we got a great culture. This is a very employee-friendly company. Nobody quits, nobody leaves. This is great. 30 minutes later, we just can't make a decision around here. No matter what happens, we're just slow. We just can't decide on anything. Well, there's a cultural issue there, right, in my mind. But it doesn't come out from asking them, what's your culture? Or how's your culture?
They're a happy, non-decisive culture.
Well, and they are. And I did on the leadership panel, I did an advanced insights on 8 of them. And every single one of them was a low D. Every single one.
Well, and that's their culture. They're a low D culture.
Yeah.
I've actually said that to clients. They said, "What's the problem?" I go, "You got low D." Just like a doctor, it's like you got low D.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a good point, Mike, that you can get the open, engaged, participatory culture, but they're also friendly and nice. They never get down to brass tacks to make a decision, and are missing that dimension. They're missing the high D somewhere in there.
Well, it doesn't matter whether you're high D or not. You got to have results, right? You got to produce, and I guess they're happy with their results, or they. But yeah. Anyway.
No, that's a good point. It's like, and I guess you just keep asking them, pushing them, asking questions about what would make them better, and maybe then they can aspire to maybe a different culture that melds what the good stuff they have now with what they want to add, and then that becomes truth as time goes if their behaviors, warrant it. But Yeah, because sometimes it's kind of like the vision, right? You're posting the vision of the culture, where you want to go. Who do you want to be like? So there's this document here, and
Hey, Eric, one other question, if you don't mind.
no, I don't mind.
So, to what degree do you do a blend between aspirational versus current culture? The same way we
Well,
have aspirational values and core
I think
values?
so. I think you start with where you are, and then usually that takes people to start thinking about, well, yeah, that's what we really are, but I'd really like to be this. Whether we're talking about vision, values, culture, kind of have to start with where you are. Now, some people would go the opposite way. I think this is a matter of facilitators' choice. Where do you guys want to be when you grow up, as a company? They might start with that question and then go back to, well, where are you? Like, it could be anything, right? I don't know. It's, I think it's really a matter of choice. I think if you have people, a forward-looking company that's always on innovative and growing, then you could probably start the conversation talking about the future they want to build. But if they have never done that before and they've never been led that way, you have to start with, okay, well, what's going on, and then what are the challenges? What do you what do you want to improve?
Let me toss out one other dimension.
Okay.
If they're in a fast-moving industry segment versus a slow-moving industry segment, how does that need to impact the culture? For example, if you're in a business, if you're in a segment that moves glacially, making fast decisions may or may not be that important. But if I'm in a business that's going down a slope at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and if I don't do something to turn that around, making fast decisions and making hard decisions, but saving the organization may be premium. It may be one of those things. All cultural values are not created equal.
Oh yeah, I think so.
But I'm not so sure that I don't usually spend a lot of time talking about that. That's something that you kind of spurred, kind of top of mind. It's easy to kind of have an academic, conversation about this.
Yeah.
But if somebody's got to make, all of us are on the, well, I'm assuming based on the photos and so on, I can see. I don't necessarily know who's on every phone number. But with all of us owning a business, if you got a payroll to meet on Thursday, that may have a different impact in terms of how you view culture versus if you don't have a payroll that you personally have to come up with X number of dollars to meet payroll on Thursday. You may not be so warm and gentle, if that $50,000 to cover payroll costs, is coming out of your retirement fund this week. I will go back to lurk.
No, it's situational, isn't it? That's why we do what we do. We work with people where they're at, and we try to take them where they want to go. So, and I think this cultural experience, or diving into the culture, is just part of what we do. This sheet up here is the values, or this is the vision exercise. A look at the future. It's also from Trusted Advisors. So, I tie all these things into building your culture, all these things that we already do. Now we're just kind of highlighting it because everybody's talking about it. I don't think we're doing anything really any different. I think setting your goals is part of your culture. Some companies do really well at that, some don't, but that's part of their culture. They're driven by it or not. People are really good at decision making because they've learned how. They develop their leaders, they develop their managers, their supervisors. It's all part of culture. So really, that's really all I had for today in terms of the discussion. And if anybody else has any comments, I think we're about out of time. But
I do have one more, and this may not necessarily be true in a micro business, but as soon as you start to get a little bit larger, where you have more than one layer of management, and I don't mean that sarcastically, who gets promoted is a huge determiner of what people perceive as the culture. If you happen to be somebody that's really good at making the cash register ring, but pardon my French, is an absolute bastard to everybody in the organization, and they get the next promotion, that speaks volumes about what the management team truly values. And it's one of those things that it can almost make whatever the published values absolutely useless, because it's like kind of like that expression, follow the cash. Follow who gets promoted and what they did immediately before getting promoted, and you'll find out whether somebody's gotten promoted because they don't get the best results in the world, but man, their people love them, versus the person who always creates results but leaves a lot of collateral damage in their path. If they get promoted, I know what the organization truly values, and the other people in the organization may or may not really appreciate that.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, people are watching what you do, not necessarily what you say you do. So,
Yeah, the actions speak louder than words. And
so, I mean, as coaches, I think it's a big opportunity to, work in this area, because it might be just a better positioning of what we already do in terms of helping people with, if people say, I am struggling with our culture, that's an open door to me. I mean, to go in and help. So, tell me more. Why do you say that? That's the next question. Anything else?
Great. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate you sharing. And as always, I will record this. It's been recorded, so it'll go up on the affiliate website. Anybody want to re-review it. Eric, obviously, if you want to share that PowerPoint with me, I can get that loaded up there as well. And any other pieces, if anybody wants to share based on this topic, we can do so via the affiliate website. So, Eric, thank you for your time. Everybody else, thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
Hope you guys have a great rest of the week.
yeah,
All right.
Everything.
Take care, everybody.
thank
Bye.
you all. Thank you all.
Same to you.
Yep.